My first guest this week is Michael Knowles. He is a conservative commentator and host of the Michael Knowles Show at Daily Wire and the Book Club at PragerU. His most recent book, Speechless, Controlling Words, Controlling Minds, was released last month, and this one has words in it. Here we talk about his book and the cultural issues we're currently facing. Here's the first segment of our interview. Michael, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
So your new book, Speechless, Controlling Words, Controlling Minds, came out last week, a week or so ago. And it's got some really interesting concepts there, but I want to start off with what made you write the book.
Well, I thought it would be ironic since my first book was called Reasons to Vote for Democrats and it didn't have any words in it. I thought it would be ironic for my next book to be called Speechless and actually not only be filled with words, but be about words themselves. So that was the first idea. And also because, a little more to the point of our politics, it seems to me that the manipulation of language is the primary instrument by which the left has inverted our culture over certainly the past 3 decades, but I think it goes back even further than that. I think it goes back about 100 years. I remember President Trump in 2016 said that political correctness was basically the greatest threat to the country, and a lot of people mocked him for it, but I think he was right. As on a lot of things, people mocked him, and it turned out that he was right. So I wanted to explore the origins of that and why it seems that we've been fighting so hard against political correctness for at least 3 decades now, and the harder we fight, the more ground we seem to lose.
I totally agree with that. And when we talk about that, when you talk about PC culture, we're talking about 2 things. We're talking about changing speech and controlling speech and basically shouting down certain types of speech. So let's start off with this. Why is controlling words so powerful?
So words shape the way we understand the world, right? They are, as old Uncle Aristotle tells us, a speech is what makes man the political animal. The way that we interact in a body politic is we have the ability to perceive reality. We form concepts. We then communicate those ideas to one another through words, which is just symbols that refer to reality. And then we try to persuade one another and we debate things and we try to come to some conception of how we ought to live. And then we pass laws and we live in society. That now, if we were not the political animal, if we were like all the other animals, we would just grunt and yell and scream and club each other on the head, which is increasingly what our politics looks like. But ideally, what we'd really prefer is to have a proper civilized society. And so if you control the speech, this is not just one facet of our political system. You actually control the whole thing. So when a handful of big tech oligarchs, I'm thinking of hipster Rasputin there in Silicon Valley, Jack Dorsey, when he presumes to boot the duly elected president of the United States out of the public square and to censor him, he is controlling politics. And this is true not just of overt censorship when they actually come in and kick you off a platform, but this is true even of the sort of pre-censorship. When the left prescribes the kind of language we're allowed to use, when the left says, for instance, you've got to call Bruce Jenner she, and if you don't call a man a she, then you're going to face consequences at your office or in school or elsewhere. They are engaging in a kind of pre-censorship that sets the game in their favor. So they've assumed their own conclusion before any debate is had, and through that they distort the whole culture.
You made an interesting point there about imaging. You said that words is kind of like images and they paint a picture. This controlling of the narrative and the speech and all that stuff doesn't have to be confined to only words. So my show airs on Sunday. The 4th is on Sunday. So say I'm going to take a day off. So I said, what can I do instead of where it says coming up guest and it's got the picture of the guest? I was going to put a picture of American flag and say off to observe Independence Day. I don't say the 4th. And because words matter. And so I said, you know what would be cool? I'm a black guy. I should probably put up an image of a black guy holding up a flag or whatever. So I want you all the listeners, I want you to do this. You'll love this, Michael. Google black man honoring the flag, right? Now, it made me go down a rabbit hole and I Googled white man honoring the flag. You get some other stuff, but you at least get a couple images of a white man honoring the flag. Do you know that there were no images of a black man? I went through several pages. You know what I got? I got some soft references to BLM and that kind of thing. I got a little bit about Black history, but oddly enough, most of what I got were Confederate flags and the random black people who were holding the Confederate flag saying that they support the Confederate flag. So whatever you think of any of that madness, it's the fact that I could not, in a country of 40 plus million black people, find a video or an image of a black man with a flag honoring it. Isn't that fascinating?
Of course, don't forget the search engine that you're looking at. I presume it was Google. I mean, the others I think would be similar, are also manipulating things. So it's not even just, you've got the level of the way people interact with symbols, but then you've got these oligarchs who are, Google controls the flow of information around the internet, Facebook to a lesser degree, and then Twitter to a bit of a lesser degree, though they have a disproportionate influence on journalists. So in that way, they actually have a huge amount of control on the narrative. So these guys are going to go in, and if they can manipulate search, which obviously they do, and if they can manipulate the way that information trends or pops up, or when you follow someone on social media, if you're actually seeing their posts, or as often happens if they're being shadow banned, if they can control that, they are controlling the public square. And in a representative government like ours, the public square is where the government happens. I mean, that's where politics takes place. So you have a handful of people who totally distort the way that we see our very country.
So why is it one-sided? Obviously, I don't even have to ask you if it's one-sided. Anybody with a brain can see it is. So why is it one-sided?
Because they're a lot better at it than we are. And actually, what I've tried to do in my book, I've really tried to take the leftist intellectuals seriously. It's not just a polemic against the libs. I really think that these guys who crafted what has become political correctness, going back all the way to the 1920s and certainly since then, they actually understood speech and censorship better than conservatives do. I know we like to flatter ourselves and say we really understand. I don't think so. I think they get it. I think they recognize that speech has limits, just necessarily. If Bruce Jenner is a he, then he's not a she. I mean, even forget about rules and regulations. Just as a practical matter, words distinguish between things. So, one thing cannot be another thing. And so what they've done is they've laid a trap for conservatives. And I think this is the trap that's really gotten us in trouble. There are two main ways that conservatives have reacted to PC, and both ways we react advances PC's purpose. So political correctness it's just out to destroy traditional standards. It's a purely negative campaign, and I chronicle a lot of the people who have said this explicitly in Speechless. So there's the first group. Those are the squishes. The squishy conservatives, what do? They just give in. They just go along with whatever the new PC rules are. Okay. Then there's another group. It's the more stalwart conservatives. And maybe they call themselves free speech absolutists. They're digging in. They're saying, I'm not giving into the left's new speech codes, but I'm not going to have standards at all. I think you should be able to say whatever you want, do whatever you want at any given time. I only defend free speech in the abstract. And the problem is both of those groups abandon the traditional standards. But the whole point of PC is to destroy the traditional standards. So either way you do it, whether you give in or you just abandon standards altogether, either way, you're losing the traditional standards. And because nature abhors a vacuum, the left's new speech codes and behavior codes are going to come in and take their place, as they have increasingly over the past several decades.
You said the book is not a polemic. You told me why it's one-sided. So I'll ask, you try to think of the liberal and the left intellectual. I won't say liberal. That's unfair. Apologize, liberals. But so if that is the case, then sell the leftists. Tell us why we should be concerned about our side's winning. We think this stuff is good. Tell us why it's bad for society, even if we think, Bruce Jenner is a woman, or even if we think all blacks are being shot in the face and they're all uneducated, violent people, and we think the country's racist. Why is it bad for them too, when they're hearing all the words that they like to hear?
I think it's bad for the leftists because I think their political vision is just bad in and of itself. I think it's worse for everybody. It leads to human misery. It leads to a huge amount of alienation. I mean, I would just point out, even if you're the most committed, diehard leftist, you've basically had the run of the culture since the 1960s. Everything has moved basically without fail in your direction. Do you think this country is doing better today than it was in, say, the 70s or the 80s? Do you think it's moving in the right direction, or is the division increasing? Is unhappiness increasing? Is suicide, anxiety, drug abuse, all sorts of birth rates are plummeting, marriage rates are plummeting. I mean, it's really, I don't want to depress anybody, but it's not going great. So that is my evidence that this leftist vision that's been given free control over the past few decades is really not a good one.
Coming up, more with Michael Knowles, author of Speechless. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, more of The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Michael Knowles, host of The Michael Knowles Show and author of the new book, Speechless, Controlling Words, Controlling Minds. In the last segment, he was talking about the problems with the way the right addresses PC culture and speech codes. And I asked him about the left, like, what are they getting out of it? What would he say to them? And here is the rest of his answer to that question.
But if I remained, even hearing all that, if I remained a committed leftist, then I'd be perfectly happy because my strategy would be working very well. And I think what conservatives have fallen for when they abandon their standards is they say, well, look, if I ban Drag Queen Story Hour from the public library, if I say that it is wrong for a pervert to twerk for toddlers at his elementary school or his preschool, why, the left might tell me that I'm not allowed to go to church on Sunday. And first of all, I say they're already doing that. As a practical matter, they did that for about a year now with coronavirus. But even as a philosophical matter, the two things are not the same. One is bad and one is good. And if you really can't distinguish between a pervert twerking for a toddler and going to your church on Sunday, that's fine. If you really can't distinguish between true and false and right and wrong and good and bad, that's fine. But then you have to admit that self-government is over because self-government relies on the people's ability to distinguish between true and false and right and wrong and good and bad. And if we can't do that, this is why John Adams said that the Constitution's built for a moral and religious people. He wasn't being a scold. He wasn't being superstitious. He was describing a fact of politics. You need to have moral conscience and faculties of reason to engage in self-government. Otherwise, if you take this radical skepticist position that, Drag Queen Story Hour and going to church are the same thing, why then you simply do not possess the faculties to make laws and rule yourself.
And that is key to a problem we're running into as we're talking to the most current problems. They keep shifting. But as of right now, with the obvious debate with CRT and these other things in the schools, and I find myself in the middle of this because I am definitely pro free speech. So I'm kind of one of the ones that Michael's beating up on. You just hit me over the head with a club. But at the same time, I'm extremely logical. And I think that the whole discourse on everything is lacking context. So I understand that. So the part you mentioned about acting like these things are the same is really important. Because the CRT thing, everybody's getting hung up in debates about the definition of the terms. And I'm like, well, what are you doing? And that's why I apologize to the liberals, because I see more of them starting to speak up and understand it, because they get that we can say we want people to be able to say what they want, but it's like the whole fire reference in the theater, right? They still understand that there's certain places where you can and can't do certain things. So it's kind of like, yeah, I'm okay with you having your free speech. Like, I'm okay with CRT. It's just a theory. Teach it. I don't have a problem with you teaching it in college if you want to teach it, because by that time, the kids have developed critical thinking skills to say whether they understand it or not. But when you push it to 5-year-olds, when you cloak it in certain ways, and as I say as a black man, my big attack on them is everything. Think about it this way: everything, as you say, words matter, and there's control. Everything that they think is pro-black, when it becomes mainstream, they find a way to switch it to intersectional, and it becomes an LGBTQ thing. So you might have started off saying this, but this is what it becomes. So your point is definitely accurate, but why is it so hard for conservatives to do it? And why is no one out there really saying, okay, we can say free speech is important and I'm going to defend it, and still say there's certain places where you can and can't do certain things?
Well, it comes that you've hit the nail on the head on the problem. It comes to the question of what is free speech. I consider myself a huge defender of free speech. I defend free speech in the American tradition. I defend free speech in similar ways to the ways that John Locke, the father of liberalism, defended free speech, or John Milton wrote the most famous defense of free speech in the English language, in similar ways, not identical, but similar. Because Milton wanted to censor Catholics, and that would be very bad for me because then I couldn't publish my book. But I think what we've gotten confused on is we're only defending free speech now in the abstract, in some totally unmoored definition of free speech that has never actually existed anywhere. John Locke in the Letter on Toleration says we want broad toleration in free speech, but we've got to limit certain ideas if those ideas would destroy the very basis of free speech. And so you see this in the American tradition, for instance, in prohibitions on fraud or threats or obscenity, right? And many other categories as well, by the way, right. Because those types of speech actually undermine free speech. If you've got a protection for fraud, then we actually can't rely on our speech because you can't trust anything anybody says. If you've got a protection for threats, you can't rely on speech because people are just going to intimidate you and try to shut you up. If you even have a protection for obscenity exists to enslave you to your lowest will, to your basest appetites. It actually makes you less free. It'd be like the modern liberal argument says that the heroin addict is the most free man in the world. If he's got a couple bucks in his pocket and can pick up some dope, gosh, isn't he so free because he wants to shoot up? Mm. No, I think we all know that man's a slave. He is a slave to his lower will, and he hasn't cultivated his higher liberty. And so the founding fathers distinguished between liberty and licentiousness. And one of the real tricks, one of the most important language tricks of the left, is they've conflated those two things. And they did it with a very cynical purpose. In the 1960s, through, for instance, the free speech movement at Berkeley, they redefined free speech, and then it was really just to destroy the traditional standards. Now Berkeley has some of the greatest censorship in the entire country. So I just think we need to not fall for that. We need to defend the actual free speech tradition in America. And moreover, we got to realize that free speech in the abstract doesn't mean anything to people who don't have anything to say.
Yep. 100%. That's why context is so important. And I say that it's lacking. It's you use homeless, heroin addict as an example, but a lot of cities have a homeless problem. It's like the homeless solution is an easy fix, actually, but they can't fix it because they won't, they like you say they have this freedom. So I can put all the money in it. I can have enough beds for every homeless person in the country. Today's left will say, you don't have the right. The trade-off as a conservative, I will say, but you have to get off the street because it's safer for everybody, including you. The left will say, you don't have the right to take that man's freedom and force him to get in a nice, clean bed. If he wants to be on the street and make the streets unsafe for everyone else, including him, you have to let him do it. And it's the same thing I look at with the LGBT community. Like, as a conservative, I want to protect their rights. I don't want them beaten up because they're gay. I don't want them attacked because they're gay. That's fine. But I don't think that, extends to you having a right to, march down the street annually for a parade. But even in that parade, we can argue about that, but then go beyond that and say, well, I can pull my pants down and I can do this with kids on the street. And that's okay because it's just what you do with the gay pride parade. It's wild and crazy. And that's okay. But because no one has context, you can't stop anybody from doing it. You can't stop the homeless guy from urinating on the street, and you can't stop someone from just, exposing himself. But if it's a straight man and he exposes himself, then there's, provisions to stop him from doing that.
Right. And I think the homeless example is so great because what our founding fathers understood, what conservatives understood until about 5 minutes ago when we got duped by the left, is that liberty necessarily requires limits. And it seems counterintuitive now because you think liberty means no limits. You get rid of all the limits. But that's not true. The homeless man would be more free if someone forced him to get the help that he needs, whether it's he's got to go to rehab or he's got to go to get some pharmaceuticals in an insane asylum, or whether it's just he's got to get off the street and get a good night's sleep in a shelter. He actually would be more free. What he is engaging in when he's on the street, whether he's doing drugs or whatever, is enslaving and it's compromising his freedom. And you see this even with the argument over CRT. I love your point where you say, maybe some graduate students or something can debate CRT in a classroom. But a kindergarten classroom is not a free marketplace of ideas. The first grade classroom is not a free marketplace of ideas. It is a place where children are taught the basics. And so they have to learn 2 + 2 = 4 in order to think about more complicated issues in mathematics. They need to learn basic facts of language or history in order to think about more complex things. And so what the left wants to do is get to those kids really early. But with something like CRT, one of the premises of CRT and the associated ideologies is that there is no such thing as objective truth. So it teaches someone that there is no truth. You're not expanding their education. You're undermining their education because their education relies on the existence of truth.
Coming up, more with Michael Knowles, host of The Michael Knowles Show and author of the new book, Speechless, Controlling Words, Controlling Minds. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, more of the Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Michael Knowles, author of the new book, Speechless, Controlling Words, Controlling Minds. In this segment, we talk about one of my favorite words, context, and how we are hurting children in the next generation with our poor training on history, context, and the good and the bad of America. And we talk about the 1619 Project. And then they add a layer on if that's not strong enough, because again, back to my favorite word here, they don't give them any context. So if I only teach you American history, I don't teach you any good, I only teach you the bad, but I don't teach you the bad in context. So you don't know anything about the rest of the world. Then of course you think it's horrible. You're like, it's a shame there were thieves in Chicago in 1897. There weren't thieves. And then somebody said, well, there were thieves in London too. Were they? I never learned that. I thought the only thieves were in Chicago. I mean, it's just so blatantly obvious, but no one, I think like you say, the attack on conservatives is they don't know how to have the conversation. And later we'll talk about how to teach them that. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, just look to your point at what Nicole Hannah-Jones did at the 1619 Project. Her central thesis was just simply wrong when she said that the American Revolution was fought to defend slavery. That's just not true. There's no evidence of that at all. But even beyond that, she said that she was setting out to reframe American history around slavery. And the left gets this. The left gets that reality has a frame. There are parameters, there are boundaries. And so if you can frame it in your direction and say that, you know, America is exclusively an evil, terrible place. I mean, just consider slavery was practiced in America less than it basically has been anywhere else in the world. We voluntarily abolished it, fought a bloody civil war to do it. Even in the Americas, relatively few people were even enslaved here. So it's a bad thing that we grappled with. Why is that the defining feature of the United States? Because in order to upend the traditional standards of the country, you've got to make the worst aspect of it the whole story.
Right. Oh, you'll love this. I have to make sure you get a copy. My book is coming out this fall. It's called Race Crazy, BLM 1619 and the Progressive Racism Movement. And in the section on 1619, I basically take apart every essay in the project. And obviously, I'm most vicious on hers. It's her project. It's the longest essay. And like you say, historians and a lot of people took the founding of the country to task. But there's so many other things that are factually inaccurate that people don't address. And then the lies of omission. So I point that out. And one of the things, like you said about slavery, if slavery is so bad and we need to, point it out, teach it, and just and make sure everyone knows just how bad it is. How many of those people who are learning this from those people who support 1619 know what percentage of all the African slaves ended up in America? I would say 0 of them know. And when you tell them it was roughly 3%, they don't believe you, right? So I just asked, okay, let's beat up all the countries that own slaves, but why is it just America? Why is that the only one that you're teaching? So again, it lacks context. So I think that it's going to be eye-opening because I point out all the ugliness that they point out, so they can't say I'm dancing around it, but I point out what was going on, put it in the context globally, and say, okay, now what do you say? So when you want to pay reparations, do you pay reparations to the 24 Chinese people who were killed on October 24th? Oh, you never learned that. Do you know how the Irish were treated when they came here? That every immigrant class worked their way up from being, not even being considered white at the time. So it's not unique. And then see what they have to say. So I think that you will find that really interesting. But it goes back to the word thing. It goes back to if they control the language, they can just say anything. And people say, okay, now I see Kendi saying he never said white people were racist.
Right, right. Well, because they really believe ultimately, I think, that they can redefine reality by redefining the words. So when it was pointed out to Nicole Hammond-Jones that her central thesis was wrong, she just kind of shrugged. I mean, the Times wouldn't even admit it for many months, and then they just didn't care. They kept putting money into it because it doesn't really matter. There's an Italian expression that if it's not true, at least it's a good story. Italians are a little prone to exaggerate sometimes, but I think that's how the left views things, and you actually see this in the intellectual movements of the 60s and the 70s in particular, where people would effectively deny that reality exists. They would say that everything is basically just words, and words, like Hamlet says when he's pretending to be insane. Now we are actually insane, and we're saying the same thing. But reality does rear its ugly head. I think this is why the left is so focused on the pronouns. Is in an Orwellian way, if you can force someone to look at a man and say that that man is actually a woman, not even that he's pretending, but that he just actually is a woman, you can force people to do anything. I mean, as Whittaker Chambers, the ex-communist, pointed out, he said, communism is not the newest ideology. It's actually the great alternative faith of mankind that began in the Garden of Eden when the serpent told Eve, ye shall be as gods. I think it's actually fitting that the left celebrates Pride Month, because the ideology is itself the height of pride. It says that we can impose whatever we want on the world and on nature through our sheer tyranny of will. And they're trying to enforce that not just on us, but on the whole world.
I do hope you check out my upcoming book, Race Crazy, when it comes out this fall, because I touch on a lot of these really important issues, the fallacies and the lies of omission of the 1619 projects. And it's just a different approach to the way we're talking about race now. Coming up, more with Michael Knowles, author of Speechless. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
The Charles Love Show continues on AM 560, The Answer. Here's Charles Love.
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Michael Knowles, author of the new book, Speechless. And here we all hear the noise of the people who are fighting on both sides. But I ask him about the masses, the people who aren't vocal about what's going on, and why aren't they engaged in pushing back against the madness? So let's get to the masses. We know what the political types are. We know what the far left are saying. We know what the people who are openly resisting say. But, that's a small but vocal percentage of the population. So let's go to the other 200 million people. Why are so many of them either okay with it, but I lean more to the other, totally oblivious to it?
Why is a fish oblivious to the water? Why are you and I oblivious to the air? It's just what we're moving in. It totally surrounds us. And especially with this issue of words, you actually could over time become significantly less aware of the fact Bruce Jenner is a man if you insist on, and everyone else insists on, calling him her and referring to him as a woman. I mean, I think this example has engendered a lot of pushback because it's just so ridiculous. I mean, Bruce Jenner is the guy on the Wheaties box, for goodness sakes. He's one of the greatest athletes in the history of the world. He's obviously not a woman. But they've done it in subtler ways with so many other aspects of the country that you're just not aware of it. I mean, think about how often people use cliches when they speak. They reach for cliches because it's just easier. And you've got these ready-made phrases that will just enter your mind. Orwell talked about this, not in 1984, but in his essay, excellent essay that I cover actually in my book, Speechless. It's called Politics in the English Language, which is just when you reach for the cliches, they give you a whole sense of the world. And so I'm really pleased with CRT, for instance, or with transgenderism. These two things have been so egregious, and conservatives have done a basically okay job at calling people's attention to it. that you're seeing pushback not from elite Republicans in Washington, D.C., and certainly not from the left. You're seeing it from ordinary parents who care about their kids, who are finally going to assert their political right to have some say over their kids' education, and they're showing up to the school boards. And what are the school boards doing? They're, on the one hand, defending critical race theory, and then at the same time, they're denying that critical race theory exists. Dr. Fauci did this the other day. When Rand Paul accused him of funding gain-of-function research that was associated with the Wuhan lab, Fauci said, "We are not funding gain-of-function research, and the gain-of-function research we're funding is totally fine." And you say, wait, hold on a second. Or we're not doing it, or it's totally fine. And that's what the school boards are doing, which I think is, by the way, really going to alienate these ordinary parents. I mean, it's the same thing when Obama referred to the bitter clingers and when Hillary referred to the deplorables. It's the same preening, ugly elitism from a bunch of mediocrities who are totally destroying our culture.
I say, I'd like to get your opinion on this, that our biggest fight is cultural and not political. And I think that's another reason why the right fails, because they try to fight it from a political standpoint, which is both, but it's driven by culture. So if you win some of the culture, that's why the left is pushing this stuff so well, because the people are like, yeah, I do feel that Black people are treating well. So you want to give them a little more, all right, whatever. But we don't try to persuade them another way. We just say, here's a law. If you vote for me, there's going to be this legislation, but you got to get into the cultural fight. And I think that, it's all being driven by the way the words are being used and the way we're manipulating the public. So why am I right? And if I am, why aren't, Republicans getting into the cultural fight?
I'm going to take you back to the 1920s. I'm going to take you away from America, drop you in the middle of Italy. There is a Marxist philosopher and communist politician there by the name of Antonio Gramsci. Mussolini's about to throw him in jail. And this is one of the worst things Mussolini ever did. Not because Gramsci didn't deserve it, he certainly did, but because it focused Gramsci's mind to write his most influential work, the Prison Notebooks. The prosecutor at his trial actually said, we've got to stop this man's mind from working for 20 years. And then, unfortunately, very stupidly, they gave him a pen and paper, and now his words have resounded throughout the ages. This guy was very influential, and he called for radicals to attain cultural hegemony. He observed that Marx's revolution failed because the revolutionaries had all these great ideas to liberate the oppressed peoples, but the oppressed peoples didn't really like the ideas. They actually sort of liked their own institutions and traditions and way of life and communities. So what Gramsci called for was radicals to attain cultural hegemony by engaging in a war of position. Not a war of maneuver where you advance and retreat, but a war of position where you take influential spots in all the institutions and then you wield that kind of power and transform the culture. And his intellectual heirs and even contemporaries, I'm thinking of the Frankfurt School, the critical theorists, later on the New Left, which one of the prominent critical theorists becomes the sort of father of the New Left. This spreads throughout second wave feminism. It spreads on the campuses throughout the whole culture. They did that, and they've really dominated all of the institutions right now. I mean, you think about the institutions. I'm talking about corporate America. I'm talking about the media, Hollywood, big tech, the government, even
education,
especially education. Most more than anything, they seem to be in favor of open borders, radical LGBT ideology, transing the kids, critical race theory, giving away American power to international organizations. Just those 5 issues alone are deeply, deeply unpopular with the vast majority of Americans, right? I'm not just talking about Republicans. Certainly, the vast majority of Americans oppose this stuff. And yet, that is the agenda. That's what gets through. Why is that? It's because these radicals have a disproportionate amount of political power.
Coming up, my final segment with Michael Knowles, host of The Michael Knowles Show at the Daily Wire, and author of the new book, Speechless, Controlling Words, Controlling Minds. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
You like me and I like you.
The Charles Love Show continues on AM 560, The Answer. Here's Charles Love.
Welcome back. We have been Talking to Michael Knowles, host of the Michael Knowles Show, about the culture and PC issues and the left trying to control language, and his most recent book, Speechless, which came out a couple weeks ago. Here's the final segment of our interview. So tell us how your book is going to guide us out of this.
So the first thing I tried to do with writing the book is to just give a history of this stuff. I didn't feel that there was really a popular history at all. Somehow political correctness, it's the worst problem the country faces. And yet there were some more academic descriptions of it, but there wasn't really a popular history of it. So I set out to do that. And in writing that, I identified this trap of PC. It's why the free speech absolutists and squishes, both of them, I'm obviously more on the side of the free speech absolutists because at least they're trying to stand for something. But I just think both of those strategies were by design going to fail. So I think the third option, which we might consider trying, is by actually going out and enforcing a standard. In the 1950s, you could be canceled for being a communist. Today, you will be canceled for not being a communist. So the fact that you can be canceled has not changed. The only thing that's changed is the standards by which people would be canceled. So I think it would be helpful for conservatives to recognize there are standards of speech. There are limits. There are certain words that are going to be taboo. That is just a fact of all societies. And so I think what we need to do is try to orient those standards. Instead of just pretending they don't exist, we need to orient them to things that are good and true and patriotic and beautiful. And the way to do it, by the way, is that we don't need to be some radical ideologues like our opponents. We can use prudence. Prudence is a great virtue. And we can look at what has worked out very well in the American tradition and draw on that. We're not allowed to speak in such common sense anymore, but prudence is a very conservative virtue. And courage is an important one, too. We need the courage to actually embrace and enforce these sorts of standards. Courage is not just a virtue. It is the prerequisite of all of the other virtues. I've long said, I hope Trump lives forever, but someday he's going to meet his eternal reward. And I hope he donates his body to science and his spine to the conservative movement, because we could really use it. And without that sort of courage, we're not going to be able to push back at all, because the left has a lot of strength. They've got a lot of confidence and willingness to enforce their own perverse view of the country, their own anti-culture. And if we don't push back, well, nature abhors a vacuum, and they're going to continue to dominate.
And lastly, a prediction. Do you see the pendulum swinging back?
I see the pendulum swing. This is not only self-interested, though it's a little bit self-interested. If people buy and read the book, I do think it would be a good help. I do think, it's not just that you've got to read Speechless.
Well, how about this? It's swinging back anyway, but buying the book will accelerate it.
It will accelerate that. I do hope. You're seeing a reaction right now, so that you're certainly going to get a reaction. The only question is the reaction going to be effective? Or are we going to fall into our same old impotent habits, our same old failed strategies? I would say for people who are skeptical of the strategy that I'm expressing, which is a controversial strategy, even on the right, my only point to you is what we're doing now is most certainly not working. So I'm open to hearing other alternatives, but this is the one that I think might work, and I hope people take it to heart. But I have one great recommendation on how to do it. And that would be to read Speechless.
I was wondering what that was going to be. He is Michael Knowles, host of the Michael Knowles Show at the Daily Wire. His new book, Speechless, Controlling Words, Controlling Minds, is available now. He just told you to buy it. And while you're at it, pick up a copy of his Amazon bestseller, Reasons to Vote for Democrats, a comprehensive guide. It is prescient, and it will teach you a lot about them. It has a lot of great points. And it's a quick and easy read with 0 words. Michael, thank you. It's been fun. I appreciate you joining me, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me. Pleasure's all mine.